At 7:15 on a Saturday morning, my phone shattered the silence with a call that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. Mr. Caldwell, this is Attorney Richardson. Your daughter has been stealing from your grandchildren's trust fund. But that's not the worst part. My coffee went cold as his words hit me. $4.2 million. 40 years of sacrifice. All of it under attack. She's created a fake grandchild, Mr. Caldwell. A phantom boy who's been receiving trust payments for 18 months. And while she's been stealing from her real children, she's been hiding another child from you entirely. I'm Edwin Caldwell, 72 years old, former bank vice president, and I just discovered that the daughter I trusted with my family's future had turned into the very kind of predator I'd spent my career stopping. But here's what my 30 years in banking taught me. When someone betrays your trust, you don't get angry, you get evidence. You build a case, and you fight back with every weapon the law allows. Over the next 60 days, I would wage the quietest war of my life. A war fought with hidden recording devices, forensic accountants, and courtroom testimony that would expose lies so elaborate, even I couldn't believe my own daughter had created them. The betrayal was worse than stolen money. She'd stolen 3 years of my life with a granddaughter who needed me most. A little girl with autism who'd been told her grandfather didn't want to see her. What happened next will show you exactly how to protect your family when the threat comes from inside your own home. Because if a retired banker with 40 years of experience could be fooled this completely, it can happen to anyone. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover the one mistake my daughter made that handed me everything I needed to destroy her lies and reclaim what she'd stolen. If this story sounds familiar, if you're worried about someone in your family, hit subscribe. Because unfortunately, this is happening more often than you think. And next week, I'll share another family's fight for justice that will shock you even more. But first, let me tell you how it all began. People always said I was too methodical, too careful, too obsessed with details that others might overlook. Barbara, my late wife, used to tease me about reading every financial statement twice, checking restaurant bills for arithmetic errors, and keeping receipts organized in labeled folders by month and category. Ed, she'd say, watching me reconcile our checking account for the third time, you review our grocery receipts like they're SEC filings. We bought milk and bread, not municipal bonds. She was right, of course. But that methodical nature had served me well during my banking career. It's what made me the go-to guy for complex commercial loans and fraud investigations. It's what earned me the trust of business owners who needed someone to spot financial irregularities before they became disasters. And it's exactly why I created the family trust in the first place, $4.2 million. That's what Barbara and I managed to accumulate over 4 decades of disciplined living and careful investing. We weren't flashy people. We drove the same Honda Civic for 15 years, taking it to the same mechanic who knew us by name and always gave us the senior discount. We vacationed at the same lake cabin every summer, renting the same 2-bedroom unit with the creaky porch and the view of the water. We bought generic groceries, clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, and chose restaurants based on early bird specials, rather than food critics' reviews. But we were strategic about our sacrifices. Every dollar saved was a dollar invested in blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and index funds that would compound over time. The trust was designed to benefit our 4 grandchildren equally. Victoria's 3 kids from her marriage to Daniel Reed, Tyler, now 16, Samantha, 14, and little Grace, who just turned 10. Plus Emma, our son David's daughter from his family out in Portland. Each child would receive their first distribution at 18 for college expenses, then larger amounts at 25 for career launches and home purchases, and finally their full inheritance at 30. I had it all mapped out on spreadsheets that would have impressed my old colleagues at the bank. Quarterly performance reviews, independent management through Fidelity's institutional trust services, annual inflation adjustments, tax optimization strategies. Everything designed to protect and grow their inheritance while providing clear milestones for responsible adult development. Victoria served as co-trustee, which seemed natural at the time. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized advertising agency, understood financial planning better than our son David, and lived close enough to help with administrative details. More importantly, she was organized, reliable, and shared my commitment to providing security for the next generation. "Dad, this is incredible," Victoria had said when we finalized the trust documents 3 years ago. "You and Mom have given these kids something most families can only dream about. College without debt, down payments for their first homes, real financial freedom." Those words had meant everything to me. This was legacy. This was why Barbara and I had chosen generic cereal over name brands, why we'd driven used cars while our friends bought new ones, why we'd saved instead of spending for so many years. Every morning since retirement, I sat in the same chair at my kitchen table, the oak one Barbara had picked out when we bought this house in 1983, with its worn finish that showed the grain of the wood and cushions that had molded perfectly to my frame over the years. I'd brew Maxwell House coffee in the same pot we'd owned for 20 years, pour it into my grandpa mug, and review investment reports and account statements. The morning ritual centered me, the familiar smell of coffee, the soft scratch of pencil on paper as I tracked portfolio performance and calculated compound growth rates, the weight of responsibility for 4 young people's futures resting comfortably in my hands. On my desk sat 4 framed photographs, arranged in order of the children's ages. Victoria's oldest, Tyler, in his varsity soccer uniform, serious and focused like his grandfather had been at that age. Samantha at her 8th grade graduation, wearing the same kind of wire-rimmed glasses that I'd worn since college. Little Grace building a sandcastle on our last family vacation, her tongue poking out in concentration, the way Victoria used to do during homework time. And Emma, my son's daughter from Portland, grinning at the camera during her middle school science fair, holding a ribbon for her project on renewable energy sources. 4 distinct personalities, 4 different paths ahead of them, but all connected by the financial foundation that would let them choose their futures based on passion rather than economic necessity. Victoria visited twice a week, usually on Wednesday evenings and Sunday afternoons. She'd often bring Grace for overnight stays, especially during school breaks, when single parenting became overwhelming. We'd work on 1,000-piece puzzles together, or I'd help Grace with her math homework while Victoria balanced her checkbook at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you for this security," Victoria would say, watching Grace struggle with long division. "The kids will never have to worry about student loans or choosing careers based on salary instead of interest. You've given them freedom." The gratitude in her voice reinforced everything Barbara and I had worked toward. This was why we'd lived modestly, invested wisely, and built something lasting. Our grandchildren would have opportunities we'd never imagined at their age. I trusted Victoria completely. She handled the quarterly trustee reports with the same attention to detail I would have applied myself. She asked intelligent questions about asset allocation and tax implications. She seemed to understand that this wasn't just money, it was responsibility for 4 young people's futures. I had no idea that trust was already under attack, or that the person undermining everything we'd built was sitting at my kitchen table, using my calculator to balance accounts that included money stolen from her own children. The first sign came buried in a quarterly trust statement I almost missed entirely. February 15th, 2023. I remember the date precisely because it was the 2nd anniversary of Barbara's death, and I was feeling melancholy, going through financial paperwork to keep my mind occupied. The Fidelity envelope had arrived 3 days earlier, but I'd been putting off opening it, knowing that reviewing investment performance would remind me of all the plans Barbara and I had made together. When I finally spread the documents across my kitchen table, everything looked routine at first glance. The trust balance had declined slightly, but that was normal during market volatility. Distributions had been made according to schedule. The asset allocation remained within our target parameters, but something made my banker instincts twitch. A subtle wrongness that took me several minutes to identify. I pulled out my calculator and started working backwards through the quarterly distributions, cross-referencing them against my personal records of approved payments. Tyler's college preparatory expenses, $15,000 for a summer program at Northwestern that would strengthen his application for mechanical engineering programs. Reasonable and pre-approved. Samantha's orthodontic work and private tutoring, $8,000 spread across 3 monthly payments. We discussed this extensively when her grades started slipping in algebra and chemistry. The investment in her education was worth every penny. Grace's specialized learning support, $6,000 for a reading specialist who was helping her overcome mild dyslexia. Another wise investment in a child's future. Emma's private school tuition in Portland, $12,000 for the semester at the arts-focused academy where she was developing her talent for graphic design. David had requested this support specifically, and I'd approved it gladly. That accounted for $41,000 in distributions, all legitimate, all documented, all consistent with the Trust's educational support provisions. But the statement showed total distributions of $66,000. The difference was a $25,000 payment to a beneficiary I'd never seen before. Someone named Mason Caldwell Reed. I stared at that name for a long time, running through every branch of our family tree in my mind. I knew every cousin, every in-law, every connection going back 3 generations. There was no Mason anywhere in our lineage. But more troubling than the unfamiliar name was the payment description. Medical expenses, chronic condition management. $25,000 was serious money for medical care. If we had a family member dealing with a severe health crisis, why hadn't Victoria mentioned it? I called her immediately, trying to keep my voice casual and concerned rather than suspicious. Victoria, honey, I was going through the trust statements and saw a distribution for Mason. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I can't place him in our family tree. Could you refresh my memory? There was a slight pause before she responded, just long enough to notice. Oh, Mason, she said with what sounded like relief. He's technically part of our extended family tree. Remember my cousin Jennifer in Chicago, her son? He qualifies under the trust language about descendants and their children. I didn't remember cousin Jennifer, but Victoria sounded confident and knowledgeable, and I'd been feeling my age lately, occasionally forgetting names or mixing up details about distant relatives I rarely saw. What kind of medical issues is he dealing with? I asked. It's really complicated, Dad. Some kind of chronic autoimmune condition that requires ongoing treatment. Jennifer's been struggling with the expenses, and you know how the trust is designed to help family members with legitimate medical needs. That was true. The trust language specifically included provisions for medical emergency support to any descendant or their children. Barbara and I had insisted on that flexibility because we'd seen too many families torn apart by medical bankruptcies. How old is Mason? 17, really bright kid, but this health situation has been overwhelming for the family. They're so grateful for your generosity, Dad. Something still felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Victoria was co-trustee, which gave her legal authority to approve distributions within the trust guidelines. And family medical emergencies were exactly the kind of situation we'd designed the trust to address. Could you send me his documentation just so I can update my records and maybe send a get well card? Of course, Dad. I'll gather everything and get it to you next week. Jennifer's been pretty private about the whole situation, but I'm sure she'd appreciate knowing you're thinking of them. The documentation never came, and when I received the next monthly statement, there was another payment to Mason Caldwell Reed, this time for $30,000, described as emergency medical intervention. I started keeping detailed notes in a small spiral notebook, the same kind I'd used during my banking career to track loan applications and compliance issues. Dates, amounts, payment descriptions, my questions, Victoria's answers. The pattern was beginning to concern me. But I had no idea yet that Mason Caldwell Reed was completely fictional, or that the medical expenses were actually funding my daughter's gambling addiction and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The quiet war had already begun. I just didn't know I was fighting it yet. Victoria arrived for dinner on a Tuesday evening in March, carrying takeout containers from Romano's, the Italian place downtown that had become our traditional weeknight meal when she visited. She usually called ahead to coordinate timing, but this time she'd simply appeared at my door around 6 o'clock, bags of food in hand and an apologetic smile on her face. "Sorry for the short notice, Dad. I was in the neighborhood and thought we could catch up over chicken parmesan." Okay. I'd been planning this conversation for 2 weeks, rehearsing questions and preparing to play a specific role. The concerned but slightly confused grandfather who needed clarification about family finances. It wasn't entirely an act. Some of my confusion was genuine, but I needed Victoria to feel comfortable, even superior, during our discussion. People reveal more when they believe they're speaking to someone less sharp than they are. "Honey, I've been looking at the trust statements again," I said as we unpacked containers of pasta and breadsticks. "I'm having trouble keeping track of all these distributions and family connections. My memory just isn't what it used to be." It was a calculated lie. My memory was fine, as Dr. Stone would later confirm in court. But I needed Victoria to believe that I was becoming less observant, less capable of detecting inconsistencies in her explanations. "Oh, Dad, please don't worry about those details," Victoria said, patting my hand in a gesture that felt patronizing. "That's exactly what I'm here for. You worked so hard for so many years building this security for the family. Let me handle the day-to-day financial management now. You've earned the right to relax." As she spoke, I noticed her handbag for the first time. Louis Vuitton. Unmistakably authentic, with the precise stitching and hardware quality that distinguished the real thing from department store knockoffs. The bag would have cost at least $3,000. More than Victoria typically spent on discretionary purchases, especially given her frequent complaints about tight budgets and the challenges of single parenting. "That's a beautiful bag," I said casually, keeping my tone admiring rather than questioning. "This old thing?" Victoria touched the leather almost defensively. "Just a little treat I gave myself after closing a big client account. Work's been incredibly stressful lately, and sometimes you need something nice to remind yourself that the effort pays off." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but it raised questions. Victoria worked in marketing for a mid-sized agency. Successful campaigns earned bonuses, but rarely enough to justify luxury purchases without affecting monthly budgets. And she'd mentioned financial stress several times during recent conversations. As we ate, I steered the conversation back toward Mason and his family situation. "I've been thinking about Jennifer and her son. I feel terrible that I can't remember more details about their situation. Could you refresh me on how exactly we're related?" Victoria was looking down at her plate, twirling spaghetti around her fork with more concentration than the task required. "Jennifer is actually my second cousin on Mom's side. Her mother was Barbara's cousin's daughter. The family connections get pretty complicated when you go back that far, and I waited for more details. None came. Barbara had been meticulous about maintaining family relationships and would have mentioned a cousin dealing with serious medical issues, but Victoria seemed determined to keep the conversation vague. "What exactly is Mason's medical condition? Maybe I could research some support organizations or specialists who might help." A longer pause this time. "It's really complicated, Dad. Some kind of autoimmune disorder that affects multiple systems. The doctors are still trying to determine the best treatment approach." I'd worked with enough medical professionals during my banking career to know that autoimmune conditions usually had specific names and established treatment protocols. Victoria's description sounded like someone who didn't actually understand the condition she was describing. "Which hospital is treating him?" "They're working with specialists in Chicago. Jennifer prefers to keep the medical details private, and I respect that." But Victoria changed the subject to Grace's upcoming piano recital, but I continued thinking about Mason's mysterious medical situation. Everything about Victoria's explanations felt evasive and imprecise. After dinner, I offered to clear the dishes while Victoria used the bathroom. Her purse sat open on the kitchen counter, and I could see credit card receipts scattered inside. One caught my attention. Cartier. $1,500 for a transaction dated just 3 days earlier. I said nothing about the receipts. But that night, I made detailed notes in my spiral notebook. Victoria was living beyond her visible means. The trust funds were being diverted to a beneficiary with a medical condition that couldn't be specifically described, and all my questions were being deflected rather than answered. Mason Caldwell Reed was starting to feel less like a distant cousin and more like a complete fabrication, but I needed proof before I could act on my suspicions. The quiet war was about to require more sophisticated weapons. I needed professional help, but approaching this investigation required extreme discretion. If Victoria was really defrauding the trust, premature accusations could spook her into covering her tracks, accelerating her theft, or worse, manipulating the legal system to gain complete control over the accounts before I could stop her. Fortunately, I still maintained relationships with specialists from my banking career who understood financial fraud investigations. Patrick O'Brien had been my go-to forensic accountant for 20 years. We'd worked together on dozens of cases involving embezzlement, wire fraud, and financial elder abuse during my time at First National. Patrick understood how to trace money movements without alerting targets to ongoing investigations. More importantly, he knew how to build evidence files that would withstand legal scrutiny. "Ed, it's great to hear from you," Patrick said when I called him on a Thursday morning. "How's the retirement life treating you? Getting enough golf in?" "Actually, Patrick, retirement just got complicated. I need a quiet consultation about a family matter, something that might require your particular expertise." We arranged to meet at Murphy's Diner, a place outside of town where Victoria would never accidentally spot us. I brought copies of all the trust statements, distribution records, and my notebook full of questions and observations. Patrick studied the documents with the same methodical intensity he'd shown 20 years ago when we were investigating a construction company's mysteriously missing payroll funds. He made notes in precise handwriting, cross-referenced dates and amounts, and asked detailed questions about the trust's operational procedures. "This Mason character is definitely trouble," he said finally, tapping his pen against the quarterly statements. "The payment patterns are too convenient. Round numbers that suggest manual calculation rather than percentage-based distributions. Perfect timing to avoid year-end tax complications, and the medical descriptions are vague enough to justify almost any amount. That's exactly what's bothering me. Ed, whoever set this up, understands trust administration procedures. They know which documentation requirements can be delayed or circumvented. This isn't amateur hour." The implications were sobering. Victoria wasn't just stealing impulsively. She was implementing a sophisticated fraud scheme that exploited her position as co-trustee and her knowledge of the trust's operational flexibility. "Here's what I need to do," Patrick continued. "Full forensic audit of the trust account going back 24 months. Bank records, distribution authorization documents, beneficiary verification files, communication trails. But Ed, if this investigation confirms what we both suspect, you're going to need more than an accountant." He was right. Financial fraud was just the beginning. If Victoria was creating fictional identities and manipulating legal documents, I needed someone who specialized in digital forensics and identity verification. Helen Morrison had retired from the FBI's white-collar crime division 5 years earlier, and now operated a small private investigation firm that focused on financial elder abuse and family exploitation. She'd consulted on several cases during my banking career, providing expertise in document authentication and digital evidence recovery. More importantly, she was discreet, thorough, and experienced with the emotional complexities of family-based financial crimes. "Family trust fraud," Helen said when I explained the situation during our initial consultation. "I see more of these cases every year. Adult children manipulating aging parents who trusted them with financial responsibility. The perpetrators usually escalate gradually, testing boundaries and building confidence before attempting larger thefts." "What kind of evidence would you need to build a solid case?" "Everything. Phone records, email accounts, social media activity, banking transactions, document creation timestamps. If Victoria invented Mason Caldwell Reed, she left digital footprints throughout the creation and maintenance process. They always do. Helen outlined a comprehensive two-phase investigation plan. Phase 1 would focus on establishing whether Mason Caldwell Reed existed as a real person. Social security number verification, birth certificate authentication, medical insurance claims history, school enrollment records, address verification. Everything needed to definitively prove or disprove his existence. Phase 2 would be more complex and potentially intrusive. If Mason proved to be fictional, we'd need to document exactly how Victoria had created and maintained the false identity. That would require surveillance, communication monitoring, controlled interactions designed to elicit revealing responses, and eventually direct confrontation with evidence that would be admissible in court proceedings. This investigation will take time, Ed, probably several months to build an airtight case, and it's going to be emotionally difficult. Are you prepared to discover that your daughter has been systematically deceiving you for an extended period? I thought about Barbara's voice reminding me to always read the fine print, about my 4 real grandchildren whose inheritance was being stolen, about the trust we'd built to provide them with opportunities we'd never had. I need to know the truth, Helen, whatever it costs. There's one more thing to consider. If Victoria realizes she's under investigation, she might accelerate her activities or take defensive legal action, filing for conservatorship, claiming you're mentally incompetent, trying to gain complete control of the trust before we can expose the fraud. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. If Victoria was desperate enough to create fictional family members, she might be desperate enough to attack my competency in order to protect her access to the money. How do we prevent that? We move carefully and quietly until we have overwhelming evidence. Then we force her to make mistakes by controlling the information she receives. Helen was describing a sophisticated investigative strategy that would require patience, precision, and emotional discipline. The quiet war was about to become much more complex, but I was ready to fight for my family's future. I've learned that patience is one of the most powerful weapons in any conflict. During my banking career, the most successful fraud investigations developed slowly and methodically. You gather evidence carefully, apply pressure gradually, and wait for the perpetrator to make revealing mistakes under mounting stress. Helen called me 8 weeks later with Phase 1 results that confirmed my worst fears. Mason Caldwell Reed doesn't exist, she said simply. No social security number has been issued to anyone with that name and birth date. No birth certificate filed in any state database. No medical insurance claims, school enrollment records, or address verification. As far as every official system is concerned, this person has never existed. So Victoria created him entirely from scratch. That's exactly what happened. But here's the interesting part, Ed. While Mason himself is fictional, the checking account receiving trust distributions is completely real, and it has a very revealing transaction history. That Helen had successfully traced the money trail beyond the initial trust distributions. Funds were deposited into Mason's account, usually within 24 hours of being transferred from Fidelity. Then, typically within 3 to 5 days, the money moved again through a series of wire transfers, online payments, and ATM withdrawals. The destination patterns were unmistakable. Credit card payments to companies that specialized in luxury goods and travel, wire transfers to online gambling platforms, and casino cash advance services, regular payments to high-end retailers, jewelry stores, and restaurants that catered to clientele with expensive tastes. My daughter was using a fictional grandson to fund a lifestyle that her legitimate income couldn't support, and she was stealing directly from her own children's inheritance to pay for it. How much money are we talking about, Helen? Over the past 18 months, approximately $230,000 has been diverted through the Mason account. But Ed, the pattern is accelerating. Victoria took $45,000 last month alone. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $250,000 stolen from 4 children who trusted their mother to protect their futures. Money that would have grown for years, providing security during college, career transitions, and major life decisions. Phase 2 needs to move quickly, Helen continued. Victoria's getting more aggressive with the distributions. She's also becoming more sophisticated about covering her tracks. Recent transfers have been structured to avoid triggering banking oversight thresholds. That suggested Victoria understood financial crime detection procedures, probably from conversations we'd had during my banking career. She was using my own professional knowledge against the trust I'd created. What's our next move? We need to force her into making mistakes that will provide direct evidence of the fraud. I'm going to set up controlled situations where Victoria will need to maintain her story about Mason under pressure. If she's been lying for 18 months, she'll eventually slip up or contradict herself. Helen's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than confronting Victoria directly, we would create scenarios where she would need to provide increasingly detailed information about Mason's situation: medical records, family communications, treatment schedules, emergency situations that would require immediate responses. The goal is to make it impossible for Victoria to maintain consistent lies across multiple interactions. Fictional characters become harder to sustain when people start asking specific questions. That's when I decided to set the trap that would ultimately expose everything. I called Victoria on a Wednesday afternoon, making my voice sound tired and slightly confused. The performance had to be believable, since Victoria would probably remember every detail of our conversation. "Honey, I've been having some health concerns lately. Nothing immediately serious, but my doctor wants to run more comprehensive tests. Some cognitive assessments, cardiovascular monitoring, the whole aging process checklist." Victoria's response was immediate and concerned. "Dad, what kind of symptoms are you experiencing? Should I come over right away?" No, nothing urgent. But it's got me thinking about estate planning and financial management. All these trust distributions and family medical situations, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed by the complexity. Maybe I should consider simplifying things while I'm still sharp enough to handle the paperwork myself. The silence lasted 12 seconds. I counted them. "What kind of simplification are you thinking about?" Victoria asked carefully. "Well, liquidating the trust early and converting everything to simpler individual accounts that each grandchild could manage independently. Fewer moving parts, less administrative complexity, clearer family communications." Another pause. "Dad, that seems pretty drastic. The trust is performing really well. Maybe we should talk to a financial advisor before making any major structural changes." "I've been thinking about it for weeks, honey. I just feel like I need to get my affairs in order while I'm still mentally competent to make these decisions responsibly." "Why don't I come over this weekend? We can go through everything together and figure out the best approach." After hanging up, I made detailed notes in my spiral notebook. Victoria was definitely worried about losing her access to the trust funds. Her suggestion to involve a financial advisor was telling. She wanted professional validation for maintaining the current structure that allowed her to continue the Mason distributions. 3 days later, Patrick O'Brien called with an urgent update. "She's accelerating the withdrawals, Ed. 55,000 yesterday. Emergency medical expenses for Mason's treatment complications. Something definitely spooked her." The trap was working exactly as Helen had predicted. Victoria thought she was about to lose control of the trust funds, so she was grabbing whatever she could while she still had access. But she was also creating more digital evidence with every transaction. Larger amounts, faster timing, more desperate justifications. Each withdrawal made the fraud pattern more obvious and legally actionable. "How long before we have enough evidence for legal action?" I asked. "Soon, Ed. Very soon. Victoria's about to hand us the final piece of evidence we need." I had no idea how right Patrick was, or how devastating that final piece of evidence would prove to be. Helen Morrison called me on a Friday morning with barely contained excitement in her voice. "We got her, Ed. Victoria just made the critical mistake we've been waiting for." Earlier that week, Helen had installed discreet recording equipment in my living room. Nothing dramatic or invasive, just a small digital device hidden inside the ceramic penguin that Grace had made for me in art class 2 years ago. The penguin sat on my bookshelf, looking innocent and sentimental, while its hollow interior provided perfect acoustics for capturing conversations. What exactly did she do? Yesterday afternoon, Victoria received a phone call while she was visiting you. She stepped into your living room for privacy, thinking you were occupied in the kitchen. But our recording device captured her entire conversation. Helen played the audio file for me over the phone. Victoria's voice was clear and unmistakable as she spoke to someone about accelerating Mason's medical distributions. "Mom, we need to speed up Mason's next treatment payment," Victoria was saying. "Dad's getting suspicious about the trust structure. We should move at least $60,000 before he starts asking too many detailed questions." Then came the response, a woman's voice, slightly older and more cautious in tone. "Honey, just be very careful. If your father catches on before we've secured enough funds for Mason's long-term treatment, everything becomes much more complicated." The conversation continued for 12 minutes, with Victoria discussing Mason's medical needs, treatment schedules, insurance complications, and family financial pressures. It sounded like a completely legitimate discussion between concerned family members managing a serious medical crisis. Except for one critical detail that Helen's audio analysis software had already identified. Ed, listen to this next part very carefully. She replayed a section where Victoria's voice shifted slightly, becoming higher-pitched and more hesitant. "Well, Mason's doctors think the new treatment protocol might be more effective than what we've tried so far." Then, after what sounded like a brief pause, Victoria's voice returned to its normal tone. "I hope so, Jennifer. The financial pressure is really becoming overwhelming for everyone. Do you hear it, Ed?" Victoria was playing both sides of the conversation. She was speaking as herself, then altering her voice to sound like Mason's mother, Jennifer, then switching back to herself again. The recording captured Victoria conducting an elaborate performance, creating the illusion of a phone conversation with a family member who didn't exist. She was providing herself with alibis, justifications, and emotional support for continuing the trust fund fraud. "This is evidence that will absolutely hold up in court," Helen explained. "We've got audio proof of deliberate deception, voice analysis, confirmation that both speakers are the same person, and detailed discussion of fraudulent financial activities." But Helen wasn't finished with her discoveries. "Ed, during our investigation into Victoria's background, we found additional information that you need to know. Information about your family that Victoria has been deliberately concealing." "What kind of information?" "You have a fourth grandchild." The world went silent except for the sound of my coffee mug hitting the kitchen table. "What are you talking about?" "Insurance records show that Victoria has another daughter, 8 years old. Her name is Lucy Caldwell Reed, and she's been receiving medical and educational services for autism spectrum disorder for the past 3 years. I felt like I was drowning. Another grandchild. A little girl I'd never met, never heard about, never had the opportunity to love and support. Why would Victoria hide her own child from me? Because acknowledging Lucy's existence would complicate the trust distributions. Special needs children require expensive, ongoing care that would trigger additional trust provisions specifically designed for medical and educational support. But recognizing Lucy as a beneficiary would also reduce the total amount available for Victoria's personal use through the Mason fraud. The betrayal was infinitely worse than I'd imagined. Victoria wasn't just stealing money. She was stealing my relationship with a granddaughter who needed family support more than any of the other children. There's more, Ed. Lucy has been living with Victoria's neighbor during weekdays, attending a specialized school program. Victoria told the school administration that Lucy's grandfather wasn't available for family support due to health issues. And Helen had uncovered the systematic deception that extended far beyond financial fraud. Victoria had created an elaborate fiction that isolated me from a vulnerable child who could have benefited tremendously from having an involved, financially supportive grandfather. I want to meet her, Helen, as soon as possible. We can arrange that, but Ed, Victoria's fraud investigation is about to become much more complex. When she realizes we've exposed both the Mason scheme and Lucy's existence, she might take desperate legal action to protect herself. Helen was right. Victoria had too much to lose to surrender quietly. The quiet war was about to become very loud, very public, and very painful for everyone involved. But I was ready to fight for Lucy's future, even if it meant destroying my relationship with her mother forever. Victoria forced the final confrontation herself, in exactly the way Helen had predicted she might. 2 weeks after we captured the recorded conversation, Victoria filed a petition with the county probate court emergency conservatorship proceedings, claiming that I was suffering from early-stage dementia and posed an immediate risk to the family trust's financial security. The irony was breathtaking. My daughter was using the legal system to gain complete control over funds she'd already been stealing for 18 months, arguing that I lacked the mental capacity to protect money that she'd been systematically embezzling. Helen called me within 3 hours of the court filing. "This is actually excellent news, Ed. Victoria just escalated to a legal proceeding where she'll have to prove her claims under oath in front of a judge, with opposing counsel present, and we'll have the opportunity to present our evidence in a formal setting with subpoena power." What kind of timeline are we looking at? Emergency conservatorship hearings move quickly in this jurisdiction, probably within 21 days. But this gives us legal authority to demand documentation that Victoria has been avoiding. Complete bank records, medical files from Mason, communication histories, identity verification documents. Everything we need to expose the fraud systematically. I retained James Richardson, the attorney who had originally contacted me about the trust irregularities. Richardson specialized in estate litigation and had successfully handled numerous financial elder abuse cases. His reputation for thorough preparation and aggressive cross-examination made him exactly the advocate I needed. "Your daughter made a significant tactical error," Richardson explained during our initial strategy meeting. "She's asking the court to declare you mentally incompetent while simultaneously arguing that you were competent enough to create and manage a sophisticated, multi-million-dollar family trust. That contradiction will be very difficult for her to sustain under scrutiny." Our defense strategy had 3 primary components. First, demonstrate my mental competency through comprehensive independent evaluation. Second, systematically expose the Mason-Caldwell Reed fraud through forensic evidence and expert testimony. Third, reveal Victoria's concealment of Lucy as evidence of her broader pattern of deception and manipulation. "We'll need multiple expert witnesses," Richardson continued, "a neurologist to confirm your cognitive status through standardized testing, a forensic accountant to explain the financial irregularities and money trail analysis, a digital forensics expert to authenticate the voice recordings and document the fake identity creation, and possibly a child psychology specialist to address the impact of Victoria's concealment of Lucy." The court date was set for June 15th at 9:00 a.m., 6 weeks to prepare the most important legal case of my life. 6 weeks to gather evidence that would either restore my control of the trust or hand it over to someone who had been betraying my family for years. During those preparation weeks, I thought frequently about Barbara and how she would have handled this crisis. She would have been devastated by Victoria's betrayal, but she would have fought fiercely to protect our grandchildren's interests. More than anything, she would have insisted that we do everything possible to build a relationship with Lucy. "That little girl needs her grandfather," Barbara would have said. "Whatever mistakes Victoria has made, Lucy shouldn't pay the price for them." Helen arranged for me to meet Lucy during the week before the court hearing. Victoria was required to produce her for a family court assessment, and Helen had negotiated supervised visitation as part of the discovery process. Walking into that conference room and seeing Lucy for the first time was one of the most emotionally overwhelming experiences of my life. She was small for 8 years old, with dark hair and the same serious brown eyes that Victoria had inherited from Barbara. She looked nervous but curious, studying me with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was processing information differently than other children might. "Lucy, this is your grandfather," Helen said gently. "He's been very excited to meet you." Lucy didn't speak immediately, but she came closer to examine my face carefully. Then she noticed my calculator on the table. "Is that an HP 12C?" she asked. I was stunned. "Yes, it is. How do you know about calculators?" "I like numbers. Mom showed me how to use her calculator for checkbook balancing, but yours has different buttons. For the next hour, we worked through simple math problems together, while Helen and the court-appointed advocate observed our interaction. Lucy was remarkably bright, asking questions that revealed sophisticated pattern recognition and logical reasoning abilities. More importantly, she seemed to enjoy having someone pay focused attention to her interests and questions. By the end of our visit, she was sitting next to me, using my calculator to solve problems I'd created for her. "Grandpa Ed," she said as our time was ending, "why haven't I met you before?" "I didn't know you existed, sweetheart, but I'm very glad we found each other." Lucy thought about this for a moment. "Mom said you were too busy with work to visit family." Another lie. Victoria had been systematically isolating Lucy from family support, while simultaneously stealing money that could have provided her with enhanced educational and medical resources. The court hearing would determine not just financial control, but whether I could build the kind of relationship with Lucy that every grandparent and grandchild deserved to share. The courtroom felt smaller and more intimate than I'd expected, with warm wood paneling and large windows that let in natural light. Judge Patricia Wells presided from behind a solid oak bench, flanked by state and federal flags. The setting felt more like a library conference room than the adversarial legal battlefield I'd been imagining. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, Sarah Chen, a sharp-dressed woman in her early 50s who projected confidence and professional competence. Behind them sat several people I didn't recognize, presumably witnesses prepared to testify about my alleged cognitive decline and questionable financial decisions. I sat with Richardson at the defense table, feeling every one of my 72 years, but determined to maintain the focus and composure I'd relied on during decades of high-stakes business negotiations. In the gallery behind us, Patrick O'Brien had set up his laptop computer and organized several boxes of financial documents and forensic analysis reports. Helen Morrison sat nearby with audio equipment, printed transcripts, and digital evidence files. The proceeding began precisely at 9 o'clock, with Judge Wells's brief explanation of the legal issues. "This is an emergency conservatorship hearing regarding Edwin Caldwell, age 72. Petitioner Victoria Caldwell Reed alleges that her father lacks the mental capacity to manage his financial affairs and poses an immediate risk to a family trust valued at approximately $3.7 million. Mr. Caldwell contests these allegations and asserts that his daughter has been mismanaging trust funds for her own benefit." Victoria's attorney, Sarah Chen, began with an opening statement designed to portray me as a confused elderly man whose cognitive decline was creating dangerous financial instability. "Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell has been exhibiting clear signs of cognitive deterioration for the past year. He's made numerous inquiries about family members who don't exist, expressed paranoid concerns about trust management procedures, and most troubling, threatened to liquidate a carefully structured investment vehicle that provides long-term security for 4 grandchildren." Chen presented her case methodically, describing my suspicious questions about Mason Caldwell Reed as evidence of confusion about family relationships. My concerns about unauthorized distributions became paranoid fixations. My consideration of trust restructuring was characterized as impulsive decision-making that endangered children's financial futures. It was a skillful presentation that used carefully selected facts to support a narrative of age-related decline. Chen had clearly researched typical patterns of financial elder abuse cases and structured her argument to match established precedents for conservatorship approval. Mr. Caldwell's own daughter, who has served responsibly as co-trustee for 3 years, is deeply concerned about his recent erratic behavior and decision-making. The family trust requires professional management to protect 4 young beneficiaries who depend on this resource for their educational and developmental support. Then Richardson stood for our opening statement. "Your Honor, the evidence will demonstrate that Mr. Caldwell has been exhibiting exactly the kind of careful financial scrutiny you would expect from a former banking executive who discovered significant irregularities in trust account management. His questions about family members aren't confused. They're justified because the family member in question doesn't exist. His concerns about trust management aren't paranoid, they're warranted, because trust funds have been systematically diverted for unauthorized purposes. Richardson's tone was calm but forceful, establishing from the beginning that this case was about financial crime, not cognitive decline. Ms. Caldwell-Reed has created a fictional beneficiary, Mason Caldwell-Reed, and used this fabricated identity to steal over $230,000 from her own children's inheritance. More troubling still, she has concealed the existence of a fourth grandchild from Mr. Caldwell for 3 years, denying both grandfather and child the relationship they deserved, while simultaneously ensuring that additional trust resources weren't allocated for this child's special needs care. The first witness Chen called was Dr. Margaret Foster, a geriatrician who had evaluated me 3 months earlier at Victoria's request. Dr. Foster, what was your professional assessment of Mr. Caldwell's cognitive status during your examination? Mr. Caldwell showed some minor signs consistent with normal aging. Slightly slower processing speed, occasional difficulty with name recall for distant acquaintances. Nothing that would indicate dementia or serious cognitive impairment, but some decline from what would have been his peak mental capacity. Richardson's cross-examination was precise and revealing. Dr. Foster, isn't it true that your examination lasted only 45 minutes and focused primarily on memory tests rather than executive function or financial reasoning capabilities? That's correct. And you weren't provided with any specific examples of Mr. Caldwell's allegedly impaired financial decision-making? No, I wasn't given details about specific incidents. In your professional opinion, would a 45-minute examination be sufficient to determine someone's capacity to manage complex financial affairs? Dr. Foster hesitated. Ideally, a more comprehensive evaluation would be preferable for that kind of assessment. Chen's second witness was Victoria herself. Ms. Caldwell-Reed, please describe for the court the concerning behaviors you've observed in your father's recent financial management. Victoria spoke earnestly about my increasing confusion regarding family relationships, my obsessive focus on trust documentation, and my reckless consideration of major structural changes that would endanger the children's security. My father built an incredibly thoughtful trust structure that has been working perfectly for 3 years, but recently, he's been making decisions that seem driven by confusion rather than careful analysis. I'm deeply concerned that without legal protection, he might make irreversible mistakes that would harm 4 young people who depend on this resource. Chen concluded by asking Victoria to explain Mason's situation and the medical distributions that had generated my questions. Mason is a 17-year-old family member dealing with serious health challenges. His mother, Jennifer, has been very private about their situation, but the medical expenses have been overwhelming. The trust provisions specifically allow for this kind of family medical support, and I've been trying to help them while respecting their privacy. Richardson's cross-examination began gently but quickly became more aggressive. Ms. Caldwell-Reed, you've described Mason as a distant cousin's son. Can you provide his mother Jennifer's full name and current address? Victoria hesitated. Jennifer Caldwell Morrison. She's been moving frequently because of Mason's medical situation. What specific medical condition is Mason being treated for? It's a complex autoimmune disorder. The doctors are still determining the best treatment approach. At which doctors? At which hospitals? Another pause. Children's Hospital in Chicago. Dr. Stevens is the lead specialist. Richardson moved to his laptop and pulled up documents. Ms. Caldwell-Reed, I have here a comprehensive search of medical records from every major hospital in the Chicago area. There is no Dr. Stevens specializing in autoimmune disorders at Children's Hospital. There are no medical insurance claims filed for Mason Caldwell-Reed. There are no hospital admission records, no pharmacy prescriptions, no billing statements. Can you explain this absence of documentation? Victoria looked to her attorney, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. The family has been very private about medical details. Ms. Caldwell-Reed, Isn't it true that Mason Caldwell Reed doesn't exist? That you created this fictional identity to justify unauthorized withdrawals from the trust account? That's absolutely not true. And Richardson activated the courtroom's audio system and played the recording Helen had captured. The sound quality was excellent. Victoria's voice filled the room as she spoke to herself, alternating between her normal tone and the altered voice she used to represent Mason's mother, Jennifer. 23 minutes of detailed conversation about accelerating medical distributions, managing financial pressures, and avoiding my suspicions. When the recording ended, the courtroom was completely silent. "Ms. Caldwell Reed," Judge Wells said, "the voice on this recording appears to be yours, speaking as two different people. How do you explain this?" Victoria was crying now, but they weren't the calculated tears of someone trying to manipulate a courtroom. These were the raw emotions of someone whose elaborate deception was collapsing in real time. I can't," but Richardson wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we have one more witness whose testimony is critical to this case. Someone who has been directly affected by Ms. Caldwell Reed's systematic deception." Helen Morrison entered the courtroom holding the hand of a small girl with dark hair and serious brown eyes. Lucy looked nervous but curious, taking in the formal setting with the same focused attention I'd noticed during our first meeting. "Your Honor," Richardson continued, "this is Lucy Caldwell Reed, age 8, Ms. Caldwell Reed's daughter and Mr. Caldwell's granddaughter, a child whose existence was concealed from her grandfather for 3 years." Judge Wells looked stunned. "Ms. Caldwell Reed, is this your daughter?" Victoria nodded, unable to speak. "And you concealed her existence from the child's grandfather, who is the trust's primary benefactor and a potential source of support for her special needs?" Another nod. "Why?" Victoria finally found her voice. I thought Dad would see Lucy as a burden. She requires expensive care, and I didn't want to complicate the family financial situation." Richardson presented Lucy's medical and educational records, documenting her autism spectrum diagnosis and the specialized services she required. "Your Honor, Lucy is entitled to additional trust distributions specifically designated for special needs support, but acknowledging her existence would have reduced the total amount available for Ms. Caldwell Reed's unauthorized personal use through the fictional Mason account." Judge Wells took a 10-minute recess to review all the evidence before rendering her decision. When court resumed, she addressed the packed courtroom with unusual emotion in her voice. "This court finds no evidence whatsoever of mental incapacity on the part of Edwin Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell's concerns about trust management were not only justified, they were the result of exactly the kind of careful oversight that responsible trust management requires." And she continued with increasing intensity. "Ms. Caldwell Reed has engaged in systematic financial fraud, identity theft, and manipulation of legal documents. She has stolen over $200,000 from her own children's inheritance. Most troubling, she has denied Mr. Caldwell the opportunity to build a relationship with his granddaughter Lucy, while simultaneously denying Lucy access to family support and resources that could have significantly enhanced her development and care." The judge's ruling was comprehensive and decisive. The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied. Mr. Caldwell retains full control over the family trust. All trust distributions are immediately frozen, pending complete forensic review. Ms. Caldwell Reed is ordered to make full restitution for all unauthorized withdrawals. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the State Attorney's Office for criminal investigation of wire fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. As Judge Wells continued reading Miranda rights to Victoria, I looked at Lucy. She was staring back at me with the same curious intensity I'd noticed during our first meeting. Victoria had stolen money, documents, and years of my life, but she'd also stolen something infinitely more valuable: precious time with a child who needed all the family love and support she could receive. The quiet war was over, but the work of rebuilding and healing was just beginning. Lucy came to stay with me permanently 3 weeks after the court hearing, while Victoria's legal situation stabilized, and she began the long process of rebuilding her life. Those early days were both challenging and magical. Lucy needed consistent routines and clear expectations, but she was also eager to learn about her new environment and explore all the experiences she'd been denied during her first 8 years. We developed our own morning ritual that honored both her needs and my longtime habits. Lucy would help me make coffee in the old Maxwell House pot, though she preferred hot chocolate served in a mug decorated with cartoon pandas. We'd sit together at the kitchen table while I read selected portions of the Wall Street Journal aloud, and she'd ask questions that revealed remarkably sophisticated understanding of numbers, patterns, and logical relationships. "Grandpa Ed," she said one morning as we reviewed stock market reports, "why do some companies' numbers go up while others go down on the same day?" "That's an excellent question, Lucy. Different companies are affected by different factors. What do you think might make investors excited about one company but worried about another?" Her analytical approach to problem solving reminded me strongly of my own thinking patterns at her age. She would consider multiple possibilities before settling on answers, and she wasn't satisfied with superficial explanations. More importantly, Lucy seemed to thrive when given focused attention and intellectually engaging activities. She'd been academically under-challenged in her previous school environment, but she responded enthusiastically to more advanced material when it was presented at her own pace. Within a month, we were working together on 1,000-piece puzzles, complex math problems, and basic investing concepts that fascinated her systematic mind. The legal aftermath took nearly a year to resolve completely. Victoria ultimately pleaded guilty to wire fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. She received an 18-month suspended sentence, conditional on making full restitution and completing treatment for gambling addiction. More importantly, she agreed to extensive family counseling focused on rebuilding honest relationships with her children and addressing the psychological factors that had led to her criminal behavior. The trust fund required complete restructuring with independent oversight and enhanced accountability measures. Lucy now receives appropriate distributions for her special needs care, including speech therapy, occupational therapy, specialized educational support, and eventual transition planning for independent living. Patrick O'Brien worked with me to establish a new trust structure that would prevent future abuse while maintaining flexibility for the beneficiary's evolving needs. Helen Morrison helped me understand the broader patterns of family financial abuse and connected me with support groups for other grandparents who had faced similar situations. Most importantly, I gained a deeper understanding of how family trust can be systematically manipulated by people who appear to deserve that trust completely. Victoria and I meet monthly for family therapy sessions focused on rebuilding our relationship within appropriate boundaries. It's difficult work. Trust, once shattered, requires years to rebuild. But we're making progress, largely because Victoria has committed to complete honesty about her past actions and current recovery efforts. She now works in addiction counseling, helping other people who've made destructive financial decisions due to gambling problems. Her personal experience with the consequences of fraud gives her unique credibility with clients who are struggling to repair damaged family relationships. Tyler, Samantha, and Grace visit regularly and are developing positive relationships with Lucy. They're learning to appreciate her unique perspectives and talents, while helping her develop social skills that don't come naturally. Lucy continues to amaze me with her intellectual curiosity and emotional resilience. She's currently working on a science fair project about compound interest in long-term investing that would impress most adults. Last week, she asked me a question that perfectly captured why this entire experience was ultimately worthwhile. "Grandpa Ed, do you think Mom learned important lessons from her mistakes?" "I hope so, Lucy. Sometimes people need to face serious consequences before they can change destructive patterns. I'm glad you didn't give up on our family." That conversation reminded me of Barbara's voice and her insistence that we always choose healing over hatred, justice over revenge. The money was important. Protecting the trust was necessary. But the real victory was gaining the opportunity to build meaningful relationships with all 4 grandchildren, especially the one who had been hidden from me for so long. If you're listening to this story because someone in your life might be vulnerable to family financial abuse, please share it with them. These situations are more common than most people realize, and early detection can prevent years of damage to both finances and relationships. If you're dealing with your own quiet war against family betrayal, remember that evidence speaks louder than emotion. Patience can be a powerful weapon, and professional help is essential for complex fraud investigations. Most importantly, remember that the ultimate goal isn't punishment, it's protection. Protecting vulnerable family members, protecting financial resources that represent years of careful work, and protecting relationships that can be healed with time, effort, and commitment to truth. The quiet war taught me that family loyalty doesn't mean accepting destructive behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions and insist on honest communication moving forward. Lucy and I finished our solar system puzzle last weekend. It took us 4 months, but we had time to work on it together every Sunday afternoon. Now we're starting a new project, a 1,500-piece puzzle of the Milky Way galaxy. Some things are worth the patience they require.